Hey Nathan, have you seen Living with Yourself? It has two Paul Rudds.
I have. Have you seen Multiplicity? It has four Michael Keatons.
I have seen it and I love it. I am on board for anything with Michael Keaton, so
Me too. And I feel like this is such a great discussion because they're very, very similar in terms of the premise of living with yourself and multiplicity. And it's one of those things where it's like, how can you not like Paul Rudd? How can you not
right.
like Michael Keaton? And how about if we just give you more Paul Rudd, give you more Michael Keaton?
Yeah.
And it's like, how could this go wrong? Um, yeah, so that's going to be our discussion for today. Hello and welcome to Ignore the Bell. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And like I just said, we are going to be talking about the new Netflix series starring Paul Rudd called Living with Yourself. And we'll get into the discussion pretty quickly here. And we are going to talk a fair bit about the film Multiplicity. I can't remember what year it came out, but it's mid 90s.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe late 80s, but yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll look
with
it up.
yeah, with Michael Keaton and Andy McDowell.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which is a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, figure out a way to see it because it is it's so funny. It's great.
It really is. It really is. Uh, all right. Now, we do have a sponsor for today's episode. So, our sponsor for today is the metaphysical branch of philosophy, ontology. What does it actually mean to be human? If you're a clone and you have all the memories of your old self, but those are not really your memories, they belong to the real you, not the cloned you. Are those really your memories? Are you really who you think you are? I don't know how you buy ontology, but ask yourself those questions. Do it today.
Yeah, totally worth it. It is, unless you're a clone, in which case probably don't, because then you'll just get
Ooh,
depressed.
yeah, good point. Good point. I really don't know how ontology is making money. I mean, philosophy departments, maybe that's who sponsored us.
Yeah, I don't know that they make a lot of money either, but
But they'll make
you
more
have to
if more
go
people
study
enroll.
philosophy at university or college
That's right.
and give them your money because they can't pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I was basically bang on. I said mid 90s with Multiplicity, 1996. Can you get
Oh,
more
okay.
mid
Wow.
90s than that? Maybe
Yeah.
1995 would be more mid, but I was right in there.
Yeah, no, you were absolutely right.
uh, all right, folks. So we're going to get into the podcast. I hope you enjoy.
Oh man, I wish this discussion could go on forever.
Ignore the bell. We're gonna keep going, people.
All right, so we are talking about the new Paul Rudd show, Living with Yourself, and not to take away from the other co-stars, supporting cast on the show, but it really is the Paul Rudd show.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I mean, it's like 90% of him, and a lot of the scenes are him doubled. So,
Yes. Whi-
living,
Which, yes, it is done in very clever ways at times.
yeah,
Yeah, really, I really enjoyed this show.
yeah, me too, me too. And I was surprised because I thought that it was going to be, I thought there were going to be a lot of cringy moments where it's just awkward, uncomfortable things that would be happening. And I'm not a big fan of comedy that relies on awkward, uncomfortable moments. I know a lot of people do. That's not my type of comedy, but in any
Yeah,
case, I was worried that there would be just a lot of that, and there was not as much as I thought there would be.
right. Yes, yes. I had similar concerns, but yes, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So the TV series, it came out on Netflix on October 18th, 2019, and the co-star is Aisling B. I'm not sure if she pronounces it B or Bia, but that's not even her last name. I looked it up. It's O'Sullivan, but she's just going with that's his wife, the Irish woman,
Right.
the Irish actress. And it was created by Timothy Greenberg, who was, I believe, a producer on The Daily Show for a while, but he hasn't really done
Oh,
anything
interesting.
beyond that. So it is interesting that he gets an 8 episode Netflix series as kind of his first big thing, which seems more significant than you would expect from somebody who doesn't really have a ton of television experience, because it doesn't look
Yeah.
like because the Daily Show, sure, it's television, but it's not a drama comedy. It's a talk show. Right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. It's a daily news roundup with comedy
yeah,
elements, but
yeah,
yeah, and this is uh my goodness, what is this show?
it's a dramedy, right?
Yes, I think that is very accurate. It is very comedic, but there are such deep moments of drama that are really great.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said this before. I think that we've talked about it, maybe a little bit with like The Office or Parks and Rec, and I'm sure we've talked about it with other things. But I think when you're talking about a dramedy, it's really about the ratio, like the balance
Mm,
of
yeah.
how much of it is drama and how much of it is comedy. And I find that if it tends to weigh a little bit more heavily on the drama side, then the comedy tends to work better. And but if you go
Mhm.
like 80-20, if it's like 80% comedy, 20% drama, then the drama is usually unwanted and doesn't really have any poignancy to it. It's just
Yeah.
there's no depth to it. Like, you know what I mean? When a sitcom tries to go deep for like 3 minutes and you're just
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, stop. This is
Yeah.
embarrassing. Like, you think that you can answer this question within this show, like within like this little scene here. I mean, like obviously,
Yeah.
like, and maybe I just watched too much Full House when I was younger because our older sibling, we only had one TV, and it was like watch this or nothing. And sadly, I sometimes chose to watch that rather than nothing. And like, you know how those episodes would end with like Danny Tanner sitting on like the edge of the bed, and like the ridiculous music starts playing, and he's like, you know, Michelle, growing up can be tough. And it's like we're supposed to be like, it sure can be. It just doesn't work. It's so dumb.
Yeah.
So I find that if it's skewed too heavily that way, it doesn't work. But if it's skewed the other way, where it's 80% drama and 20% comedy, then the comedy tends to have a pretty good punch to it
Mm,
because it
yeah.
relieves that tension of the drama. And
Yeah.
our lives are mostly dramatic with, you know, brief bouts of comedy to relieve us from that tension and anxiety that we deal with on a fairly regular basis. Like, if you think about your,
Yeah.
no matter what job you have or even school, most of it is boring and not entirely pleasant, but then when there are funny moments, they're such a relief.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the show does a really great job with that balance. I was super impressed uh, by the dramatic moments. It because it does seem like when we're comparing it to Multiplicity, which is
Yeah.
just a comedy, um, then it is this series is so much more. Living with Yourself is it asks all these questions, and they are challenging questions, and I like that. You know?
Okay. I okay, this is my perspective on it. I feel like I really enjoy the series, but that's not I don't enjoy the ontological question that's going on the entire time. I find that so much of this is just entirely paint by numbers, predictable in terms of the questions that you would expect. It's all of the questions that you would expect to see come up, and all of the scenarios that you would expect to see would come up in this show. You know, and by the way, like, folks, we are going to spoil it. We're going to be talking about the actual content here.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you know, the whole like, well, who am I then if these memories of that I have are not really my memories, if I haven't actually experienced anything? And there seems to be some strange tension in the show, and I was kind of excited with the maybe first or second episode, I can't remember which one, where the clone version of Paul Rudd, it's the second episode where the clone version of Paul Rudd, when he's leaving the clinic and he is just so exuberant, and with everything, every small little detail of life, he's just in love with being alive in the world and all of those sensory experiences. And then so it was sort of like he's a brand new person. And then you're like,
Mhm.
oh, well, this is kind of interesting then. But then this tension of, no, but he's the exact same person. And he's got the exact same memories. He's just a perfect genetic version of, the other Miles. Um, and so then it ends up becoming that it's not him delighting in the world for the first time. It's just him miserable that he doesn't have his own wife, and that he's kind of trapped where he's in love with her and wants to be married but can't be because there's only one of her. Um, and and it just like I say, it goes over that entire thing of it's exactly what you would expect. He's going to try to be with somebody else. Yeah, that doesn't really work. He really misses her. Of course he's going to see if he can get his own version, a clone version of her, because where else would this show go other than that? That's the
Mhm.
natural plot point to explore. It was interesting that they did not allow that. I think that's going to be a season 2 plot point. I mean, I'd
Right.
be
Yeah.
shocked if it's not a season 2 plot point. Uh, there is the nice twist at the end of she's pregnant, and then there's zero way of telling which one
Yeah.
it is because they've got the same genetic material. So, um, they're passing on essentially the same DNA. Uh, but so that's an interesting thing. Like that was a pretty good twist on it. But
Yeah.
aside from that, there's there's not really, to me, all of these questions are uninteresting.
Mm.
And didn't I didn't really care for the attempts at profundity within the show. I feel like, because I mean, maybe because I've got uh, not much of a philosophy background, but I've studied it to some degree. I've taught it a little bit, and the ontological question, I think, is deserves a lot more than 8 episodes of a
Right.
show
Yeah.
about a clone. And I think that it didn't. I just feel like it can't really get into those questions in any significant way, and you just kind of see Miles being tortured by these things, like the clone version of Miles. But I thought those were the least interesting parts of the show.
Mm. Yeah.
That's just me.
Right. Yeah. I definitely agree with the pregnancy being a great twist at the
Yeah,
end. Like that. That is really incredible. Just, seeing the three of them all hugging together, and the I guess the implication there is that they are going to try to raise this child together, like the three of them.
I don't know. Uh, I mean,
Um,
like, and that's where, like I say, like, I'm really not interested in a lot of these types of questions, because it, it's an issue of, like, even the whole, if you thought, the reason why I didn't watch the show initially is I'm just like, I know what this show is going to be. I've seen Multiplicity, except this show is going to try to tackle these issues in a more serious way than Multiplicity. And Multiplicity is just like, we can't answer these questions. We're just going to kind of have fun with this premise. But
right.
Living with Yourself is, let's really try to answer these questions. And it's like, well, what happens? Like, is it cheating if it's the clone version of him when he sleeps with his wife? And it's like, of course the clone version is going to sleep with his wife. Like, you can see that from a mile away. And if not, like, are you new to this planet? Like, because of
Right.
course that's what they're going to do. And then when they do it, I'm just like, ugh, like, you're just giving us the most obvious things. Like, to me, the more interesting parts of the show like, and of course, like, the whole he's better than me because he's this perfect, like, there's no issues with his DNA. It's like the absolute perfect version of Miles, or the best version of Miles. So of course he's better at work. He's more sociable. People enjoy his company more. So that makes the other one question his own self-worth. Um, but I thought it kind of got interesting with the FDA kidnapping him and try. I'm like, this is going in a fun direction. I did not see that. I did not see, like, some kind of federal government agency trying to enforce the no cloning laws, and these
Right.
low level bureaucrats within the FDA who are trying to be like some kind of investigators where they really have no authority. Like that was a fun little thing that this show did that I was not expecting. But everything else that I was expecting, just it's not surprising, and I didn't feel like it offered a lot there. There's other things I really, really like, but just that's my issue with those points.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I didn't really love that that part of it.
Okay.
I from the very beginning when Paul Rudd or Miles does call the FDA, and then they're on the line, and then he mentions cloning, and they're like, okay, please hold, we'll transfer you to the right department. All of that, then I was like, oh, okay, well, this is going to come back later.
Uh-huh.
and and then it did. So I wasn't like really surprised by that, but I was surprised that there is, like, I know that there is a law against cloning, but I didn't know, who you would contact.
Who knows who you would even contact about that, right?
Right. So, like, calling the FDA of all things, like, I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Is a person a food or drug? I don't quite.
Right.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, yeah. I have no idea who you would call.
Right. But yeah, so I do think that that was like a little bit of a fun diversion. I, I, it's interesting that they decided to basically shut that down like right away, like after that one episode. Um,
Yeah.
then it's just like, oh yeah, our department got cut, so even though we know that you have a clone, we can't do anything anymore. And it's just like, oh, so that's not going to come back in future seasons, or
There's so many interesting parts to this, like interesting potential pathways that just kept getting shut down. And then they just kept going with the most conventional storylines that you would expect. And that's where I kept getting frustrated because, you do kind of get into the actual, whatever it's called. What did you say? It's Top Happy Spa. Is that right?
yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And you had suggested that our sponsor would be Bottom Angry Spa.
Yes.
And people, you can have as much fun with that as you want. but so in any case, trying to reel it back in from that, uh, the him getting into he goes into the spa, and then you find out that there's like this like corporation that owns them, and that these are
Right.
not two
Yeah.
entrepreneurial guys, and you're like, oh, this is interesting.
Yes.
How big of a I don't know conspiracy is this? How far does this go? And like, of course, you see like Tom Brady, who's leaving the spa when he first arrives, which is really what convinces him to go in. And that there's been like he's like the sixth iteration of Tom Brady, and I believe he's got 6 Super Bowls. And so I think it's kind of a funny thing. It's like every time he gets injured, it's just get a new version of Tom Brady, so that way he can be perfect again.
Wow.
And he continues to defy. Uh, like he's playing at a level at an age that is just unprecedented. So
Right. Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
See, I didn't like I didn't connect all those dots there because I am not much of a sports fan, but
yeah, he's like basically got everything, and he's of course very attractive. I believe he's married to like a supermodel, and every time like they ask him, they're like, "What do you think about trying to win the Super Bowl again?" He's like, "Well, if you have everything, why can't you have more?" Bing, as he smiles. Like he's just one of those people who just expects that he's just going to have nothing but awesomeness every day of his life.
Right.
Right? It's just kind of like,
Yeah.
who is this guy? And yeah, so I
Yeah.
thought that was funny. It was a funny little thing if you know anything about like Tom Brady, that he's like leaving there. So, but it's an interesting thing because you're like, oh, so is this show going to explore different people who have become incredibly successful? Is it going to get into this really interesting question of people who are the people who are most successful in our society? Is it because they're gaming the system by essentially cloning themselves, fixing, repairing any errors, any imperfections within their own DNA that might cause some kind of physical impairment or mental impairment or whatever, right? That just getting that perfect collection of DNA, and that it's this big conspiracy that's going on, and ultimately Miles is a very, very small part of this. And then that's kind of like making this big, interesting comment about society, and like those at the top who are most successful, what is the reason for their success? Is it really like grit and determination, or is there some kind of conspiracy in which they are gaming the system and it is an unlevel playing field for everyone else, and we all feel like it is, but we can't actually account for it, you know?
Right.
That to me, it's like, wow, there's an interesting question. And then it's like, it just goes right back to, never mind that, what if the clone sleeps with his wife? And you're just like, bah! That I'm just like, you were so close to going down this interesting storyline, and then you just abandoned it.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's I don't know. I was really interested in what's his wife's name? Um
I don't know. Let me look
I
it
don't
up.
remember.
Let me look it up. That's terrible, but I don't know. Mrs.
Yeah.
Credenza? Is that it?
That
Is it?
stupid credenza.
Is it Mrs. Credenza?
That was such
Um,
a great moment with them smashing it. I'm just
yeah.
like, yes, finally.
It seemed like the clone though was kind of into the credenza, and then like I was a little surprised that he smashed it. He seemed to have more of an appreciation for interior design and aesthetics, and but Kate Elliott is her
Kate.
name.
Okay, yeah. So I think the one episode where it starts with her basically having the talk with both of the both Mileses.
Yeah.
That I think is a really, really great scene, in just because you're seeing what that must be like for her
Yeah.
to be put in that position. And I'm like, oh, this is really good for her to actually know that there are two of him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, really interesting, because the idea of like the clone sleeping with her, then like it's been done, like multiplicity and
Yeah.
all that. And I think that is sort of I don't even want to call it like a oh, I can't even think of the word for it. But anyway, like it is a more or less standard thing to
Right.
that you would expect to happen. Um, but now we're getting to see it from the other perspective, with her realizing.
And that is, yes, I thought that was a really strong moment. I really appreciated that. But this is what I think is so great about the show. It is there's fairly inventive and uh, maybe inventive is not the right word, but fairly interesting things going on when it comes to narrative perspective.
Yes.
And that I think is what this show does. That was surprising, and it does such a great job of it. And the way it's broken up, for the most part, in episodes where you're following the original Miles, and then you get his entire viewpoint of events, and then you get the clone version of Miles, where you have his point of view, and you're now trying to square up those two different experiences that they're having, and you're identifying with different characters throughout the show. Because first, you really, really identify with the old version of Miles, and then the show completely shifts in the second episode, and you then, as an audience member, you start identifying with the clone version of Miles, and they've done a good job in building sympathy for him. First, it was sympathy for the original Miles, then it's sympathy for the clone version. And then the most fascinating thing is when they also then build sympathy for Kate. And then you start getting things from her perspective. And the entire season is shifting from one person's point of view to another person's to another person's. And I'm trying to think of another show that does that, or that does it this well, where it causes you to re-examine what you thought you understood, and maybe not what you thought you understood, but the way you feel about different characters.
Yes. Yeah, it's I agree. That is the best part about this series.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. I picked up on it, probably around like episode 4, where I realized like, oh, okay, it's each episode is like it's just going back and forth for
Right,
each episode, and it
right.
maintains that I think for the whole season. But Kate's stuff is like a little uh, off of that pattern,
Yeah,
but it's still
yeah,
really good.
yeah.
Yeah, there is a novel, and I don't remember the author, but the novel is called Flipped, and like it's a young adult novel, and it's told from the perspective of two different kids um, who are neighbors, and so the girl is interested in the boy, and they're like, I don't know, like 12 for the majority of the story, I want to say. Um, and so, the girl loves the boy, and the boy just does not want to be romantically involved with her, like, at all.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's a certain point where it flips, right? Where their feelings get reversed. But each chapter, it goes back and forth between being written from the boy's point of view and then the girl's point of view, and
Hmm.
they do describe the same events
Hmm.
as told from each of their different perspectives.
Hmm.
One of the other fun things is that you actually have to turn the book upside down in order to read
Mm.
half the chapters because it's flipped.
Right.
but yeah, so it's that would be, I think, the closest that I can think of.
Yeah, but and
And
that is a
that book was also made into a movie by Rob Reiner. Um,
okay.
so
So
yeah,
this is and this is getting fairly um I, I mean we probably won't get all that deep, but it does get fairly deep. It allows you to get deep into film theory and what the way film actually tells a story in comparison to prose. So this is my point is that novels in prose then you absolutely get that because
right.
a novel is all about point of view. Everything in a novel is point of view. I mean
Yeah,
that is one of those things of it is I would say the most important thing in considering your novel. Point of view is
yeah,
everything. It's how you are telling the story, and it is as basic as is this going to be first person point of view or third person point of view?
right.
Tell me in film what's the difference, first person point of view or third person point of view?
Uh, yeah, they're the main thing that I would say is that it depends on how many cutaways you have to other plot lines. But yeah,
Okay, okay, but that's
but it's
still
not.
okay. Okay, but this is a great point because in if you've taken, and I'm not saying you, but I'm saying anybody who's watching this, if you've taken film theory, then you've maybe heard this conversation before. Because the thing is that that's still, as far as prose goes in terms of fiction, then that's still third person point of view, but it's third person point of view close, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
or it could be a third person. The way I always teach it is that it's third person effaced narration. And what that means is that it's focusing in on a singular character where you get their thoughts and feelings. And so it's limited omniscient. So you don't know what other people are thinking or feeling. Except in terms of their reactions to your protagonist. And so you get the thoughts and feelings of your protagonist. Now, you can shift from chapter to chapter, like something like A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin or Game of Thrones, the TV series. Then he does this in the books. Then each chapter, and he just starts it where he just says the character's name. This is going to be a Bran chapter. This is going to be Tyrion chapter, and then that it's still not told from their perspective. It's still not first person point of view. It's still limited omniscient third person narration, but effaced narration, as in he's trying to hide the fact that he's a narrator. It's not this 19th century form of narration where it's, you're reading this book and you're wondering whatever, right? Like basically, and I know that it's kind of an atavistic storytelling, like narrational style that you get in a series of unfortunate events, which I have not read, but I'm familiar enough with the books that it's very atavistic. It's like that old style of narration of talking directly to the reader,
Yeah.
right? So, but that's still third person point of view. And in terms of film and like who is the narrator in the film? Who is actually narrating it? Because you could have a narrator who's telling you the story, but they're still not really narrating the story, because the film theory goes that is it the director? Is it the camera who is the narrator? And then there's been some experimental films. I know that Hitchcock did, I believe it was Hitchcock who did a film that's experimental in terms of narrative perspective, where the entire thing is filmed from the character's perspective, where the only time that you see them is when they stand in front of the mirror, right? And I believe, I have not seen the movie, but I believe Hardcore Henry does this, where it's supposed to be like first person shooter. Like I haven't seen it, but I'm familiar enough with it that takes the same kind of, in video games, then you get that you do have first person point of view. But film, aside from experimental films, film doesn't do this. So it, in terms of having that close narration where you're following a character, that to me is still third person, but all of this is prose. It's fiction, like written fiction.
Right.
And so it's interesting that this show is playing with that type of, with that question of film theory itself, that it does shift and it forces you, because basically what typically happens is you, and in terms of screenwriting, then the, like, and in case people don't know this, if you just enjoy watching movies but you don't really understand much about screenwriting, the principle in screenwriting is whoever you're going to introduce first is typically who you want the audience to identify with. So they are then going to identify with that character, and they're on that character's side throughout the film, throughout the TV series, whatever it is. Then it's like, okay, I'm latched onto this character. I have sympathy for them. I find them to be sympathetic. I find them to be, what's the word? It's not necessarily likable, but you are cheering for them, right? That you want to see them be successful. Essentially, they are your protagonist, and you want the audience, if not to identify, but to at least be rooting for this character. So you don't start with, or at least you don't want to spend too much time with somebody who's going to be a secondary character. And you don't really start with somebody who's going to be the villain, right? You don't want to spend too long with that person, because then you're telling the audience, identify with this person as the protagonist of the story. But then this show is doing interesting things, because it's giving you a good long time with Old Miles, and then it entirely shifts, and it's like, now you've got all this sympathy built up for him, and now we're going to shift, and now we're going to have all this sympathy really for the antagonist to Old Miles, which is going to be the clone version. And then your sympathy and your allegiance is going to then shift to Kate, where you're saying, yeah, what Old Miles did is awful. And even what New Miles did is awful too, because he's been deceiving her. And that's a pretty awful thing to do, because he really is an imposter and a complete stranger to her. And so then you kind of identify with her, and then it kind of pulls you away from her, I think, in a lot of ways with her. Then you get into her backstory of, she's disappointed with Old Miles. So then she starts considering online dating and having an affair and maybe leaving him. And then you're like, oh, poor Old Miles. Like, he can't help the fact that he's crappy and his DNA is busted. He's trying. And, and so then you're kind of like, there's a little bit of resentment perhaps, but then it kind of comes back where you're when she does go with clone version. It's just, in terms of the allegiance that you have to these characters and the way the actual series is directed, and if you treat the camera as being our narrator, where you don't have a voice speaking to you, but whatever the camera's looking at, it's saying, this is the story I want you to see, I'm choosing what you will get to see, then that's forcing us to then identify with different characters and to shift who we identify with, which is so interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is incredible what the series does because you do get this back and forth with, seeing those same events playing out from different angles, from different perspectives,
Yeah.
and, just seeing how it is, uh, it is, it, it's fascinating because it is, uh, I think that, as much as you're bringing up like the differences in their DNA, um, then it really does appear to be a matter of perspective for them, where it's whether they're looking at the world, positively or negatively,
Mm-hmm.
um, in large part from yeah from my view of it, where it was because even when old Miles, when he was just sitting at home all the time, then he still didn't write, his play.
Mm.
And it was just kind of because he's so bogged down by all those experiences compared to, again, Clone Miles, where everything was new and fresh and
Mm.
different. Um,
But is
and
it? Because if that's the case, then why does New Miles just why can he not move past Kate? That's where I'm saying that there's this tension in the show. On the one hand, it's saying he's experiencing the world for the very first time. So if that's the case, then he wouldn't necessarily have this uh, the things
well,
that
I think from a if we look at it, basically doing a Freudian or Oedipal comparison here, then it would be that Kate is the first person that he latches onto as, basically as a, not as a mother figure specifically, but in that the bond between mother and child is so ingrained into uh, their DNA because they have shared an existence, if you will, for 9 months prior to birth, and then um, yeah, I mean, even if you look at birds in nature and or Jurassic Park, where John Hammond, was that his name?
I believe so.
Where he was like, I want to be present for all of their births so that they can, I forget what the word is, like imprint. I think it's imprint
Yeah.
on me. And so I'm wondering if it's similar to that, where it's basically Kate is the only thing that Miles knew, that clone Miles knew, essentially. And that was the first person that he had any kind of real connection with uh, once he became alive, and it was impossible to beat that standard. Similar to, again, as Freud would say, like, oh, everybody looks to find their mother, and they never live up to that standard because that is the baseline for this is the perfect person because they're the first person that I knew.
I
Does that make sense?
I mean, maybe. It seems like but the show also is exploring the idea of I mean like his half sister brings up like her boyfriend or whatever he is brings up the ancient Greek idea, although he doesn't credit the Greeks with it, that we are split when we are born, essentially,
Hmm.
that there
Right.
is our other half that exists and there is one other person who is the other half of our soul, and we
Yes.
will be weary and experiencing nothing but melancholy unless we are reunited with our other half. And that essentially the show's saying, if you're following that principle, then you're saying, okay, so there's only one Kate for 1 Miles, but now there's 2 Miles, and all
Right.
that the other Miles wants is to be with his true soulmate. So then, if that is really where this is being settled, then isn't the obvious answer then you just have to clone her? That if you've now duplicated original Miles, then you now have to duplicate Kate. Otherwise, if you're following that principle that she really truly is his soulmate, uh,
Hmm.
And I mean, the so this idea that like the three of them are going to raise the kid, to me, is just stupid. It's never going to work, and none of them can possibly think that this will work.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and I don't think anybody who's watching the show believes that that's going to work at all. And so if the entire second season is going to be this contrived plot of, let's try to make this work, two of us and one of you, and we'll somehow be this blended family. Like, no. But
I
it is
definitely
interesting.
think that that's what they're going to go with.
I know.
I
I know
it's
that
going
it
to be
is
good, but
no, I agree. And I think we're probably going to have one good first season where there's some really good elements, and probably I'm not expecting much for it from this point forward, because I feel like they've basically explored what they wanted to explore, unless they're willing to go in different directions, like some of the stuff that I was suggesting of like get into like these interesting things of how far up the ladder does this whole thing go, this whole big conspiracy of cloning people. But it's interesting that Kate doesn't actually want to be with New Miles, and essentially it's because he's too good. He's too good for her.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where it's like, well, then they're not soulmates. That she really should be with old Miles. But as far as like your point of it's really about perspective in life, like I don't see it that way. DNA damage is a real thing, and it does happen environmentally, naturally. Like if you go, there's a bunch of like it's still fairly niche science in terms of like what doctors and scientists are researching. I mean, there's plenty of legitimate doctors who are exploring it, but basically like just so much of it is just focused on, heart disease and cancer and whatever else, right? All these other like ailments. But in terms of like your DNA does get damaged in part through age. That this is one of the reasons why they do stem cell injections, right? Stem cell therapy is reintroducing your own DNA into your body, right? Or like from like fetuses, like, but to reintroduce that to cause your body to then regenerate in the way that it really should, that our bodies do break down at a cellular level as we age. And that if you have this person who's got all of the memories, but their DNA is perfect and there is no DNA damage, then it is that he is physically superior, and therefore he is going to be mentally superior in terms of social settings. He's going to be socially, in terms of intrapersonal relationships, or interpersonal, I can never remember the difference, but in terms of interacting with other people, he's going to be superior to old Miles. He just is a better version.
Right.
And so I look at that, and I don't know what you do where he is just insistent that he wants to be with Kate, but that is surprising because they're not really a good match. Because she kind of wants to be miserable too.
Right. Yeah, and that I think is something that would be really interesting, and that now that I think about it, they probably will end up doing in season 2 would be to clone Kate, but then she would be too perfect for clone Miles because clone Miles has already started to
that's exactly what I think it should do. And I was thinking about that. That is exactly what it should be. It's that, and I thought that's kind of where the series was going. And then I did appreciate the twist, but I'm also a little disappointed with it, where it's like the three of them are going to try to raise this kid. Like, that's stupid. I like the idea that she's pregnant and that you can't tell who the father is. I like that. But the idea when you get that 3-person hug, and I'm like, no, I don't. I appreciate what the show's doing, right? That for Clone Miles, he's got all of these false real memories of and yearning to be a father with her, so it is this wonderful moment for him when he finds out that she is pregnant. But I liked the idea that you see new Miles, or the clone version of Miles, becoming more and more bitter and disillusioned, and he's not really enjoying work. He's starting to skip out on work, and he even gets to the point of considering taking his own life, and he is miserable, and he's kind of falling apart. So then I'm like, yeah, then introduce clone version of Kate, where she's going to come out like this, and he's not like that. So then you get this whole imbalance thing, right? They're unevenly yoked, and that's the interesting idea. Like I thought that would be so interesting, and I don't think it's going to go there.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like if they do go down that route, then I feel like inevitably what would happen is that old Miles uh, will somehow become more appealing to new Kate.
Mm, yeah.
And then it's going to be this weird, messed up thing. Like,
Right.
and I don't think it's going to be enjoyable to watch. I just think it's going to be, oh yeah, now they're just all four of them are kind of mixing and matching their relationships.
Yeah, it's a really weird love triangle that's going on here, and like, yeah, if it turns into like, I don't know, some other geometric
Quadrangle.
pattern, yeah, exactly. Then I'm like, I mean, I think this is why I'm saying that's the obvious place to go.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't want this show to go to those obvious places, and that's what. Can we maybe shift at least for a little bit into Multiplicity?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Multiplicity, what's great about that is it really doesn't go where you think it's going to go, and in part, and it's such a simple premise of, okay,
Oh, yeah.
I can't keep up with all of my obligations, right? Like I mean, I think most busy adults feel that way. So then it's like, if I actually had another version of me who could then pick up the slack, then we could both be kind of doing half the amount of work, but experiencing, twice as much, enjoyment out of our lives.
Yeah.
So that's the premise. But then it goes in such a great direction of, okay, but when you clone a person, it's not an exact clone. And so because you have this genetic potential, and in part there is a certain amount of nature versus nurture, right? And depending
Right.
on which, because you've got dominant and recessive genes and all of that, so even though you've got the same genetics, then presumably one of those could end up coming through. I don't know, but basically, like, I don't quite know like whether Multiplicity is doing that, but basically different elements of his personality get highlighted, where you get
Yes.
different versions of the guy. And so you get the ultra aggressive, incredibly competitive version of Michael Keaton, who's a workaholic and has to be successful. Then you get the fairly effeminate homebody who's very domestic, and so like, and that's a really, really funny version of him. And then because you get a clone of a clone, or if not a clone of a clone of a clone, I forget exactly how it goes, then you end up getting one that's just not right. And, and he's just a dope. And that's like the best version of him, because he's like, certainly from a comedy perspective, hey,
Right,
Steve,
yeah.
I'm spitting on bugs, where he's just
Yeah, no, it is oh man, it is really, really great, and I do think that it is uh I I feel like it's when he is first Xeroxed, as they call it in the
Xeroxed. Yeah,
movie.
that's right. It's such a great way. It's such great writing, because that
Yeah,
immediately everybody knows what that is.
right.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so when he gets Xeroxed, then I feel like both of them are the exact same, and then based on their experiences, then they start to differ. So the one, it's like, okay,
Maybe
yeah,
that's yeah. It's been a
you're
while since I've
just
seen it.
you're just going to be working. And so then he becomes just obsessed with just work. He's like, nothing else matters because I
Right.
don't do anything else anyway. So
Right.
it's all about work. And then, he makes the second clone or Xerox copy. I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then that one is doing all the homebody stuff. So
Yeah.
So it's great. And then the fourth one just, yeah, there's just something wrong.
Well, it's because yeah, and that's why I was saying it's such great writing because it's like, yeah, if you make a photocopy of something, it's not a perfect representation. Like if you
Right.
Xerox something, right, then
Yeah.
like, oh, there might be a little shadow over here, and some of like that font might not show up right. But then if you do a copy of a copy, then it ends up being even worse. And so it's just like that's such brilliant writing. That's like Star Trek level writing. And I don't mean that Star Trek is the best writing, but I mean it's Star Trek level writing in just give them a metaphor that they like give them an illustration
Right.
that everybody can immediately understand to explain this convoluted process that it's like,
Right. Yeah.
wait, what are you doing when you're like cloning somebody, and what happens with dominant and recessive genes? And it's like, we Xeroxed him, and everybody's like, oh, okay, got it, Xeroxed. It's just it's economical writing where you just say that one word and people know what it is. And
Yeah.
I love multiplicity in the sense that, like, to me, it's a much more interesting storyline where you get the ultra competitive version of Michael Keaton. I can't even remember the character's name in it.
I don't
But I'm
remember.
pretty sure that it's not Steve. That the one who calls everybody Steve. That's what's funny is like none of their name is not Steve, and so yeah, I'll try to look it up here while I'm talking.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering if he goes by Steven and then that one just calls him Steve. I don't
Um,
remember. Um, but
uh,
yes, no, I agree. It
no,
is.
his name is Doug Kinney. Doug.
Oh,
It's not Steve at all.
okay.
But I guess what I'm saying is like what I appreciated in Multiplicity that I just because living with yourself is trying to be is taking itself, I think, much more seriously, like is clearly taking itself much more seriously than Multiplicity. But I like the fact that basically the workaholic version of Doug, he still has a libido and he wants to satisfy that libido, and then he's like, well, I am married to this woman and that would be an obvious place for me to go and do that. But if I start going on dates with other women in town, even though I might be interested and attracted in them, it looks like I'm having an affair, so I can't really do that without destroying the original Doug's life. That is so much more interesting and so much more fun from a comedic perspective to explore, because you've got basically, you're saying this is what the character wants but they can't have it, so now they're going to get themselves into hijinks, right?
Right.
Because like, but instead with this other one it's like, oh, he's just going to be in turmoil, like he's just going
Right.
the whole time, and you're like, this isn't funny. And not that there's a problem with it not being funny, but it's just like this is so brutal to watch at times that I don't know how you get the comedy to then pop
Yeah.
coming off of that, because I don't think that it does in the latter half of the season.
No.
The
Yeah, no, it really
first
doesn't.
the first half, it's got some really good moments of comedy, but the latter half, not really. Um,
Yeah, at that point you're just watching because you desperately want to know
totally,
where everything is going.
totally, yeah.
It was totally, made for binging.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about that because, and I forget who it was, but I did see somebody was interviewing Paul Rudd, and maybe it was Conan O'Brien, and he was talking about I don't know if you watched that interview, Conan
I did.
interviewing.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that it was, you can verify this for me, where Conan said, and he said, I don't mean this to sound offensive, but like, this is incredibly binge worthy, like where, you know, it, a lot of the episodes, they kind of force you with not exactly cliffhangers, but they end at a point where you want to see this get resolved and you need to click or to allow Netflix to automatically play the next episode within
Right.
5 seconds because you want to find out how that's going to get resolved. That
Hmm.
each episode is at the end of it is introducing some new interesting twist on the story.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's interesting from a comedy perspective in the sense that this is a dramedy, right?
Mhm.
But it's interesting serial storytelling, and I really appreciate what we're seeing with comedy in a lot of ways, because remember before when we were talking about, I think it was in the Parks and Rec um, podcast, then I was saying how I've tried since then to watch sitcoms that are traditional sitcoms with a live studio audience, and you get the laughter, every like all these lines are being interrupted by laughter, and trying to
Yeah.
watch that stuff now is so difficult to do after watching these comedies that are not doing that, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not the three camera sitcom anymore, but it's single camera, no studio audience, and trying to take the elements of drama and giving you comedic moments, but trusting that you're going to laugh when it's funny. We're not going to tell you when it's funny. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and so I appreciate that, but I also appreciate that you get a comedy here that's doing something fairly um, a more serialized form of storytelling instead of just singular episodes that stand on their own.
Right.
I find
Yeah.
it's much more satisfying.
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. It is. It's interesting, and I really wanted to bring this up. It's only 8 episodes, which makes it really quick to binge as
Yeah.
well. You can get through it like in an afternoon.
Yeah.
um, but uh, yeah, and from a comedy perspective, it is really good the way that you can space that out. But yeah, I don't know. If it were on TV, then it wouldn't work because nobody can tune in to just one episode
Right.
in the middle and know what's going on. Like you need to know what happened in the previous episode, and like you need to know like everything that happened in the
Yeah.
previous episode, not just the teaser.
Yeah.
So a simple recap would not work.
Nope.
It's you're retelling basically half of the previous episode
Yes.
before you get to new stuff, and
Yeah.
that is really incredible. It is. That's why when you brought up that it was somebody from the Daily Show
Uh-huh.
who who wrote and directed this.
Mhm.
Because I kept seeing the name and I was like, oh man, I should look that person up, but I didn't do it myself. But I am so impressed with his ability to write these episodes in this way, and I'm really curious how the series would play if you instead watched episode 2 and then 1 and
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
4 and then 3 and
Mhm.
went that way,
Yeah.
because I think that you would still be able to do it.
I think so
um,
too.
but then you would, I think, be more connected to new Miles.
I agree.
Um, and that's really interesting because it feels initially like it's like, oh well, I've got a pretty good balanced view of each of them. I
Yeah.
relate to both of them relatively equally, but when you like really think about it, you're like, I probably do relate more to old Miles.
Yeah, and I
And
think you have to, because of course anybody who's watching is the old version of us.
right, yeah,
Right? Like hopefully there's no one who's watching who is a clone that who
right,
killed
yeah.
the original version of themselves. Like
Yeah.
if somebody's watching this series, man, I hope that they're not watching my podcast because I don't want them to come after me. They're like, "What did you say?"
Oh
Um,
man.
but yeah, so I think we are going to have more of an identification with old Miles. But you are right. I think that is really interesting if you did change the order. And I, especially the first half of the season, I'm so interested because when I was watching, I was really impressed by how good of a job he's doing in retelling us the same events, but keeping it interesting, even when we know exactly what's going on. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
like, I find that, like, if you're watching Memento, right, Christopher Nolan's Memento, then I find that that's not a very fun film to watch multiple times. It's it's challenging. It remains challenging, I think, like surprisingly so. When it's like just so obvious of like what it is, that it's just all of the scenes are just going in reverse order, but there's so much overlap from one scene
Right.
to another, and there's all this dramatic tension or dramatic irony where it's like we know what the character on screen doesn't know, but it's just frustrating, right? I find so
Right.
much of watching Memento is just kind of frustrating. But this, I didn't find that I was frustrated. It's that we know that we're going to see the same events, but from a slightly different perspective, and
Yeah.
they continue to be enjoyable. And that's, I'm like,
Yes.
how did he do that?
Hmm.
Because it's all about execution in that, in the writing and in the directing. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm not quite sure, but I think one of the things that's happening in this show that does make it stand out, and I would like to briefly talk about this, is the sound design. Um,
Mm.
Man, you've got some really strange sounds going on this show. In terms of the soundtrack to it, the score more or less to this, there are some really strange synth kind of
Yes. Yeah.
and not subtle, like hitting you
Right.
over the head with very strange synthetic sounds, right, from a
Yeah.
synthesizer.
Yeah. If I were to take a guess, like I'd have to rewatch it in order to really pick apart the soundtrack, but it did like really stand out to me. But I would guess that they are probably doing a synthesizer over top of live instruments,
Yeah, it
playing the
could
same
be.
thing, because that would, be a good metaphor or
Yeah,
for what's happening in
yeah,
the story.
replication of the real thing. Yeah, that is interesting. Uh, but
I mean,
it's
even with the title sequence,
mhm,
then it becomes more and more distorted as
it
it goes
does,
on.
like
More and
damaged
more.
DNA.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah, yeah. That does make sense. I didn't think about it as being damaged DNA, but until just now. But yes, that because it does become more and more distorted as you're
yeah,
watching, like, and as the story kind of gets messier too.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but I think that's one of the ways that he's keeping us interested, though, is
Mm.
that it's very overt musical cues that you're getting throughout this that
Right.
are helping to they're directing you in terms of how to interpret these events, whether this is a lighthearted moment or whether this is like kind of an unsettling moment that it's and I was in part because I was talking about this with like my Twin Peaks discussion, but it's like it sounds overproduced. And I don't mean
Mm.
that in a bad way, but it's just like
Right.
that's way more than what you would expect. Like
Right.
what you're
Yeah.
getting with the sounds from this. It's way more than you would get with a regular comedy or drama. This is like hitting
Yeah.
you over the head with these sounds, and you're just like, what are you doing? Why are you um, hitting me with this?
Yeah. Yeah. I've realized relatively recently, like within the past few years, that sound design plays a huge factor in how much I enjoy a film.
Yeah,
Like the soundtrack and
yeah,
just sound design.
yeah.
And like I mean, like it is an obvious thing. Like everybody brings up, oh, if you watch a horror film with the sound off, then it's not scary at all. It's like, well, obviously, but but
Yeah.
even um, but yeah, so even with a different film,
Like that's such a stupid thing to say though, because and I do hear people say that though, and it's like, yeah, but if you watch a
yeah.
musical with the sound off, then is it any good? It's just a bunch of people prancing around. It's like,
Right.
yeah,
You should try that though, since you don't like musicals.
maybe I'll start to appreciate it. Oh, good, I get all the prancing,
Oh, you
but
don't
none of
like
the
horror
music.
films? You should listen to it with the sound off. Oh, you don't like musicals? You should listen to it.
These are great, terrible ideas.
Oh man. Yeah. But yeah, so I definitely do agree that the sound design on this series is it's so fascinating.
Yeah, it is really, really interesting. And that's where I'm saying that I think that's one of the ways, like one of the techniques that I believe it's Todd Greenberg, I want to say, that he's using to keep us interested when he is repeating events on screen.
Mm,
Uh, so, because I'm trying to figure it out, because I'm saying it is working. So, how is it working?
yeah, yeah, no, I think you're right because I'm trying to think of some moments, and yeah, the sound design does come through in so many of those moments where it's just like, yeah, you're watching the same stuff, but now we're getting it's almost like the music is adding that extra layer, adding that extra perspective for you, right? Where it's
Yes,
saying, this is what you know, this is going to be felt in this way now compared to last time. So yeah, it
exactly.
is, yeah,
Yeah, it's employing all of these different tools that you have that are really techniques within filmmaking, and it's like, well, how do we want, like, because you can, depending on, like, you're trying to achieve to a large degree, you're trying to achieve affect in the audience, right? You're trying to achieve them feeling something, right? And so, like, when people say that about a horror film, then it's like, oh, if you turn it off, then you don't feel the fear. And it's like, okay, but so you're just removing one of the elements to it, right? Like, it doesn't make sense.
yeah.
It's like, go to the ballet, but go blindfolded. Like, you'll still get the sounds, but is that the whole purpose of it? It's like, it's not cheating to employ these other things. It's not cheating to
Yeah,
have, a soundtrack to have different sound effects. It's not cheating to have different lighting, different costumes, different set design, different actors, different acting choices, different
yeah,
shots and angles and editing. None of that stuff is cheating.
right.
It's all free to use however you want. And it's just, I think it only doesn't work if it becomes so obvious of what's happening and it does pull you out, right? Especially if
Right.
I guess I would say, it's not even so much if you recognize it, it's that if the other parts aren't working. Like, if there's terrible acting, but there's really good sound design, that's not going to forgive the terrible acting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is yeah. It, I mean, as much as, people love to talk about film being a collaborative medium in terms of the people involved, it's like just look at the different departments involved and all those different elements need to work together.
Yeah.
And it's collaborative in that way. Film doesn't a a modern film because obviously there were films before sound was around or color or uh, what have you, but a modern film is made up of all those different elements, and to remove any one of them it just completely changes the way that we experience it. It is a different experience at that point.
Right.
Um,
But I think that's where the issue comes up with horror. I think that's maybe why horror gets a bad reputation in that way, is that sometimes it'll be really bad writing. The dialogue's really
mm,
bad, or the acting's really bad, or maybe the special effects are bad, but then it'll still
right.
get people to jump in their seat because they have some kind of like
Yeah.
ridiculous sound of boom. And then you're like, that was cheating because it wasn't earned because everything else was bad, but that one thing still kind of worked, but nothing else was working. I wasn't, identifying with characters or sympathizing, or do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just I wasn't in the story, and then that one element just felt unearned. And so I think that's where it is, that if some of these elements are not firing right, then
Mhm.
we become more aware of the techniques that are being used,
Mm. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Um, but yes, and speaking of different elements, I really, really loved there's the one scene in particular that really stood out to me where I had to remind myself that it was one actor, that it's just Paul Rudd playing both parts.
Mm.
Um, and because it is one continuous shot, and he is having a full-on conversation with himself.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, obviously, it's just a simple composite shot where you record um, each side of the conversation separately and put them together. But the way that it blends so seamlessly together, I think, is like it's so impressive that Paul Rudd was able to do that. And I mean, like obviously, the that's one of the skills that an actor has to have. But the ability to have one half of a conversation and then go back and do the other half of the conversation and not have anybody that you're you know uh, responding to, reacting to, right? In
Right.
terms of not just in terms of the actual words that are being said, but also just in terms of the emotions. Like he needs to be aware of where the other him is going to be standing or sitting
I know that there's
or
different ways
different.
of doing this. Do you know, like, because don't they sometimes use a stand-in who
They
will
do.
say the
Yeah.
lines and do like all the blocking where they'll do the
Hmm.
gestures and stand where they're supposed to? I don't know how they did this. Um,
Right. Yeah. But regardless, it was still very impressive to me.
it is, and I think to me the most impressive part of it is that um, it didn't it never felt like there was attention being drawn to this, to the fact that
Right.
it's Paul
Yes.
Rudd playing two different roles and interacting with himself, that like
Yeah.
I just didn't even consider it. I think in part because I've seen it done a lot. um,
Right.
so I'm not questioning, like it's not like it's the first time I'm seeing this and I'm going, how are they doing this?
Right.
Right, that it's like
Yeah.
I'm aware of how they're doing it for the most part, so I'm not thinking about it. But there was never a missed moment where you just say, ooh, that was clunky looking, that was awkward,
Right.
that didn't seem right. And I think that speaks to how good of an actor he is, in this
Yes.
sense that
Yeah.
you never really say, oh, okay, you expect us to think that he's actually talking to himself, but that didn't look right, or that didn't sound right, or that wasn't a good reaction to what the other Paul Rudd was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that there are a few moments, specifically in the last episode, during the fight sequence, where I mean, obviously he's wrestling with a stand-in because he
Yeah, yeah,
like they're on the floor together and whatever. And there were a few shots where I'm like, okay, this is like very clearly like, okay, make sure that we can't see the other person's face. Like,
right,
but
right.
uh, but yeah, other than that, like it was so well done having um the two Paul Rudds.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, so I think we've already talked about our kind of predictions for season two. I'm presuming that this is going to get picked up for a second season. I don't know if
Yeah,
there's been
I
any
mean,
confirmation about that yet.
yeah, I would imagine with Paul Rudd in this, then I feel like that's an automatic green light for a second season.
I mean, Netflix has been kind of pulling back on some of their
That's
shows,
true.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, they seem to be still giving shows a certain amount of rope where they're like, have they canceled really anything after just one season? Because it seems like they are canceling after two, and after three. But
Right.
after just a single season, they don't really. I'm trying to think if they've done that at all.
Yeah, that hmm.
I mean, if somebody can mention it in the comments, I'd be interested. But no prominent examples come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It is a a very rare occurrence if it does happen at all. So
Yeah,
I would imagine that it will be back for a second season. Probably if season one didn't do well, then they just give them a little bit less of a budget
I agree. I
for the
think that's what
following
they would
season.
do.
And I
And I,
mean, already I feel like this is a very relatively inexpensive series to
yeah,
produce. Like it has to be very
yeah,
low budget. They only have like what, like 20 actors,
if
you know.
that,
Yeah,
yeah,
like probably like 10 speaking roles,
speaking.
I would
Yeah.
say.
And then, yeah, background
Yeah.
characters. But
It's very minimal in that way. It is only 8 episodes, which are each only a half hour long,
yeah.
approximately.
And it's not a
And
sci-fi show. There's no
right.
real special
Yeah.
effects. I mean, like obviously the whole composite shots that you're getting with two Paul Rudds, but not
Yeah.
it. They're not doing a ton of CGI with building different sets or like
Yeah.
crazy
Yeah, and that's the other
explosions
thing.
or
Very minimal in terms of sets. Like
yeah,
you only
no,
go to a few different locations.
yeah,
Yeah, so I do believe that it will be back for a second season. I don't imagine that the second season will be nearly as good as the first season, which was already it was really good, but it wasn't, oh wow, this is a masterpiece and
no,
I want to see this go on forever. No, it was good.
yeah, no. It's very watchable. It's
Yeah.
enjoyable. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I do think that it becomes too interested in the second half of the series with these, you know, pretty
Well,
profound questions.
I guess I don't have an issue with the profundity so much as I do with the moral questions that come up, where it's yeah, once you get into that, then I'm kind of like, I don't really, I don't really care about that just because I'm like, I know my morals, and this doesn't really interest me that much. Uh, when it's like, oh, well, is it right for the clone to sleep with his wife? And I'm like, I don't care.
Oh yeah, no, I agree,
So
and
that,
it's a really big conversation, which I don't want us to get into here, but I'm finding more and more, and I've been thinking through this a lot. Like I've got a fair bit to say on the subject, um, but I found that, uh, and this is, I'll just say it that as more and more as society becomes more and more secular, I find people are looking at art in terms of fiction with novels and TV shows and movies and even music and what we expect out of celebrities that we're holding these up to moral and ethical scrutiny in ways that seem in a strange way, in a secular way, they seem so puritanical of if this doesn't match the morals that, generally speaking, we have as a society, then we are going to reject this. We don't want there to be immoral storylines and immoral, um, uh, what would like immoral themes
mm,
portrayed on screen. And it's this whole idea of because if we have that, then people will then watch that and say, I didn't think that, but now I think it. Um,
mm,
there's this
right.
terror that people are getting their morality from television, movies, books, video games, and to me, that's just silly. It's
Yeah.
it's so silly. But do you know what I mean? It's like where, let's say, and I'm not defending any one particular person, but it happens all the time where it's like if you look at it and then you say, oh, well, that like for instance, like with Joker would be a really good example of this, where you did have the song, like just the song within it of Rock and Roll Part Two, and that guy he is a sex offender, and he, I believe, is in prison. Gary Glitter, who wrote the song, and then people are like, that movie had that song by that guy who did this awful thing. You're just like, that song had nothing to do with the criminal
Right.
offense. So if you think though, but this is like what it is, as silly as this, people think some stupid young guy is going to watch that and then he's going to become a sex offender because there was that sex offender guy's song in the movie, and it's going to be like this. Oh, I'm not a sex offender. Do 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 do. Now I'm a sex offender. That's how stupid they are, right? Like that's how stupid the argument is. Um,
Right.
and so I'm right there with you when it comes to the morality of it. It's like, please don't pander to me. Don't think that you're going to give me this like statement about like that I'm really going to say like, what are the ethics of this? And it's like, if I
Right.
want to get my ethics, I'm not going to turn to Netflix and watch a Paul Rudd show to get my own personal ethics.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so
Enter
that's why I took a lot of issues with those parts of the series where I did not care when they started talking about the morality of everything and
No, that's
all
what I'm
that.
saying.
I'm just
It was
like,
boring.
right, yeah. But I do think they do still, uh, you know, again, from my way of looking at it with the new Miles or clone Miles, being a brand new human and experiencing everything for the first time, I think that that is something that is an interesting train of thought to follow. And I do feel like they kind of dropped the ball there where
They
they.
dropped it. They just abandoned that because it was so fun. There's no way you can watch episode 2 with him like getting his head out the window when he's driving and running into like the field of corn and picking the apples, right? And like just be like, it is so whimsical. He is so
Yeah,
exuberant. He has got this lust for life that is just so charming that it's
yeah,
impossible to watch that and not at least kind of smirk and go,
right.
that does look kind of fun. It is kind of nice to be alive. There are really nice moments like that. Like there
Yeah,
there are pleasant things that exist in this world that you just stop paying attention to because they're mundane,
yes,
because you see them
yeah,
every day. And it does give you an appreciation for all those little things. And then they
yeah,
just were like, never mind, he's not interested in experiencing something for the first time. He's just going to become miserable and all he's going to want is his wife. And it is
yeah.
like it's just it's a little disappointing that it was going there, and then it just, like I say, I feel like there were multiple pathways that all they started walking down them and they went nope, and then they went down this one, nope, and then I feel like they
Yeah,
just chose the least interesting one to go down. So
yeah. Yeah, so there's that, which I thought was really great, and I wish that there was more of with season two. I want there to be less bedroom scenes.
yeah, it was really, I think it was episode 4 because we were talking about it the other day, and then you were like,
Right.
I was watching those with mom and it was kind of awkward. I'm like, it hasn't been awkward at all. And then I watched episode 4 and I went, oh, that's the episode, got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh dear.
No, because at first you said it,
Um,
and I'm like, is there something wrong with me? Because I didn't even notice anything. And then I watched episode 4, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, I noticed.
yeah. Yeah. So I would appreciate fewer of those scenes. That it was so weird with the first time you go to the washroom, don't look. Oh, okay. Like what it actually looked like. I'm like, what is going on?
It was so interesting. It looked like, I don't know, like different cleaning chemicals. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. It was just a rainbow of like, I don't even know what the consistency of it was, but it wasn't just like liquid. It was thicker than that.
It was very viscous. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It looked like a lot of like different like cleaning chemicals, like
Yeah.
some kind of like shower scrubber, toilet bowl cleaner, like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, but just different colored.
So that
Uh,
like totally threw me off. I was like, that is very vibrant in a
I
show
just,
that's
right.
relatively dumb.
I'm like, and it might sound dumb, but I was just like, tell me more about the cloning. I was so interested in these two Asian guys, and one of them has obviously, he's newer to the country. There was this whole thing of like, wait, what's going on with his wife? He's like, oh, you live back there with your wife? No. And he's all sad. And you're like, oh, are you a clone? Or did something happen to her? What's going on? Right? And then it's just like, oh, we've got this corporate structure, and then you're like,
Right.
wait, what? I
Yeah.
thought you guys were in charge of this. And it introduced all of it, and then it just went, never mind. And then it just
Right.
went over here, and I'm like, wait, tell me more about that guy who lives there with his kid, but he doesn't have a wife, and he seems to be subservient to the other guy, but he's not doing okay. And
Hmm.
what's up with that? What does this have to do with their whole operation?
Yeah. I know. I have. I'm really wondering if his daughter is actually like, I don't know, like a clone who was aged down or whatever of his wife, just so that he could have like a child. Like, I don't know,
Sure. Yeah,
I don't
okay.
know. It would be an interesting path to follow, which
It'd be
means that the
really
show
interesting.
probably won't go down that path.
Exactly. That's exactly
Um,
it.
I
Even the
also
whole
just wanted
thing.
I
Go
wanted
ahead.
a single scene where they drive out to the woods and bury a body.
Yeah, and it was so weird because then
There are so many graves there.
Miles goes out and like with his like coworker and forces him to dig up these bodies by hand, at least to expose them by hand, no shovel. I don't know why he insisted on this, but okay. And like and it
Didn't
just
he
it's like
bring a shovel with him though?
yeah, but he didn't let him use it.
You're
so,
right.
so that's what I'm saying. I don't get that, but
Also,
okay.
okay, yeah, I do have one issue with that. How in the world did Clone Miles know where the other bodies were buried?
Oh, how how did he
He didn't
even
wake up there.
how did he know where any body was buried? Like his own?
Yeah, like just
I was thinking that. I'm like, not only does he know where all of the other bodies are buried, he knows like the area of where he was
yeah,
buried, but he wouldn't have that memory. The other
right.
Miles said to him, he's like, I woke up in a grave or whatever. But it's like, if somebody said to me, like, oh yeah, over in like that state forest, I woke up in a grave, I'm like, do you know how many acres that thing is? Like,
Right.
I
I'm
couldn't
not
find.
going, can you draw me a map? It might come in handy later.
Right. No, none of that would come up at all. So it was just really, really strange that yeah.
Yeah, that whole scene, like, yeah, just because I couldn't, like, that is a very clear plot hole, and I don't use that, very often, but
No,
that
me neither. I don't get
that
concerned
really
with them,
is,
but that bugged me. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that bugged me. But I don't understand. So he shows like for a show that seems to be concerned with depicting reality fairly accurately, then how is it that you find out that there is a mass murder of human beings going on, that this is essentially invasion of the body snatchers, right?
right,
That is
yeah,
essentially the plot of this, where you're murdering people and then replacing them with versions of them that are not really them at all, and then sending them home to their family members. And you're saying, and this is going on not just in this particular town. This is going on everywhere.
right,
So
yeah,
his coworker then goes there to the woods and finds this mass grave of, and it seems like some of them fairly prominent people, right? Like, is that Tom Brady? That kind of
right,
thing. And
yeah.
then it's just like, oh, and we're done with that. That's it.
Yeah. I don't get the point of that whole sequence. It's to prove to him that he is a clone, but it's in the most roundabout way that you could possibly imagine,
Uh-huh.
which has like, oh, it's just so awkward. It's like, okay, I'm gonna take you to the woods where I definitely did not wake up because I'm the clone, and you're gonna dig up all these other bodies,
Uh-huh.
including your own. And when you see your own face, you're going to say the stupidest thing ever, which is, why would they make a clone of me and then bury it?
Uh-huh.
I'm like, this is the stupidest thing ever. He's just the
Right.
stupidest person.
He is the stupidest person, and he's not a very realistic character. And like I say, for a show that
No.
seems fairly concerned with depicting reality, that's strange. Because then you've got this clone version of Miles, and it's like we have to take this so seriously. He's in love with his wife, but he can't be with his wife. And you see how he's like considering taking his own life as a result of this, right? And how like brutal this is and agonizing. And then it's just like, oh, and by the way, in the same season, we're also going to have him expose this mass grave to his coworker, and he's just going to be like, meh, there's a mass grave. Like,
Yeah.
he's not troubled by this. The coworker's not really troubled by this. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've I, for one, have never gone out to the woods, started digging with my hands, and found a dead body. The closest I've come to be fair, to be fair, the closest I've come is I was out in the woods, way, way, way deep in the woods in Alberta. This is on
Not know where this is going at all.
this is on First Nations, well, a Métis settlement, right? So I'm like way deep in the woods, and I found the skull of, I think it was an elk, or maybe it was something like that. And I remember I was so freaked out and I was looking everywhere. Like it had been dead for a long time, right? Like there was no flesh at all. I was looking for wolves. And I had like my dog with me and I was just like literally looking for a pack of wolves ready to devour me. I'm like, this is a grave site, or there's some kind of like monstrous killer out here who's just waiting for me to find this. The heck? And like I went back and I talked to our dad about it and he was just like, oh yeah, that's just so and so. He hunts back there. He cuts off the head and he leaves it. And I'm like, what? But I'm not a hunter, right? But like I believe that is like, why are you gonna bring that back with you? Like if you field dress it right there, then you just
I
take,
guess.
I guess. I don't know. But I'm saying I found the skull of an animal in the woods where you would expect to find a wild animal in the woods, and it
Right.
freaked me out for a while. So I'm saying that if a coworker brought me out to the woods, forced me to start digging my hand, and I find a human face, I'm not gonna be okay.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I can say that pretty accurately. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. It would have been great to see him to see him go back to the spa and be like, bring me back to life.
Yes.
You killed me.
Yeah,
No, he didn't.
right, exactly.
But again,
Yeah.
the show's not interested in that.
No, not interested in that at all. Um, yeah, it's very, I don't know. I just feel like it really is so focused on this ontological question and this question of soulmates, and like this kind of um, question of love and the question
Mhm.
of what does it mean to be a human, but it's really not interested in the premise, which is there's this mass cloning going on. And
Right.
I don't know, that just it kind of feels a little bit like The Walking Dead, of like The Walking Dead's not about zombies, and it's like, what? The entire thing was built on zombies, but you're not interested in zombies? No, we're really interested in like the drama between characters. And you're like, what about the zombies?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I've been duped. Bait and switch.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Getting back to our multiplicity comparison, and I know that we do need to wrap this up, but I just wanted to say multiplicity uh, is a very different film. As much
Uh,
as they are similar, then,
yeah, like
like,
like TV series and then film, but like a very different story.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Because with multiplicity, he knows what he's doing. He intentionally creates a copy of himself,
Yes.
uh, and he does it for a purpose. And he knows that there will be two of him once he
Uh-huh.
does this.
Uh-huh.
With Paul Rudd, then it is more of the reaction to, um, finding out, what? I cloned myself. I didn't know that's what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And so that, I guess, is where I guess I'm a little bit more lenient on it than than on Multiplicity, which I think is so amazing.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. And I guess, and I know that it's very difficult, like aside from the obvious premise, like where it's the same premise of like, cloning this person and there's only one wife and the tension that comes from that. So, okay, that's where the similarity is. And they're like living with yourself is at least in part a comedy. But
Right.
it's still hard to compare these two different stories. But I feel like Multiplicity just works from beginning to end on a scene to scene basis and is so satisfying and rewarding on a repeat viewing of it, and living with yourself. I don't think works as well on a scene to scene basis. And we've just pointed out a bunch of missteps and
Yeah.
unexplored storylines. It doesn't feel as tight as Multiplicity. And it's not just because it's longer, because it's 8 episodes compared to one
Mhm.
film. It's just that it seems in some ways, I hesitate to say this because I really don't like this attitude, but kind of seems like some weak screenwriting where why bring up this storyline if you're not going to explore it? Why bring up this if you're not going to explore it? Unless
Right.
this is just, you know, we have to introduce more storylines that we can explore in season one because that's how you get a season two. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, if that's the case, and because it's not, it really, I imagine for Timothy Greenberg and the creator, and for Paul Rudd, they don't feel like this is a complete product, whereas
Right.
Multiplicity is a complete product.
Yeah.
But I still think that a TV series should, like a season of a TV series, should be able to stand on its own pretty well. And
Yes.
I don't
Absolutely.
think that this does. It's got too many weird storylines that get introduced and then abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah. Multiplicity is incredible in like it's not much longer than an hour and a half.
Right.
And it explores just about everything that you would ever want in that
Yes.
premise.
Yes,
It does it
exactly.
so efficiently. It
So
even
efficiently.
handles, what do you do when you realize, okay, as all, of these stories do, oh, you know what? It's better if I'm just handling my own life by myself.
Yeah.
It handles that ending so perfectly with the other three copies of himself going off to start their own business. Perfect.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's really it's incredible. Like just how, and I'm not saying like I agree with you. It is perfect. It's perfect, and I think there's a lot of like perfect films. That's not like there's like two perfect films in existence. I'm just like for what it is. It doesn't mean it's the greatest film ever made, but
Right.
it is the most perfect version of that film that there can be. That
Yeah.
you could try that again and again and again. You could rework that screenplay again and again and again, reshoot, edit it differently. It's the best version that that story can possibly be. There's no missteps in there. I really
Yeah.
don't see any. Um, yeah, and I think in part, then you look at it, and that was directed by Harold Ramis.
Mm.
So let me just like very briefly: Animal House, Meatballs, Caddyshack, Stripes, National Lampoon's Vacation, Ghostbusters, um, you know, Ghostbusters 2, Caddyshack 2, Groundhog Day, um, Analyze This, Analyze That. The last film he directed was Year One, which I have not seen. Have you seen
I have
that?
I have not seen that
You know what I'm
either.
talking about with
Oh wait,
Jack
maybe.
Black and Michael Cera.
Yes, yeah, I remember the advertisements for it, but I did not
Yeah, I
see it, I
haven't
don't
seen it
think.
either. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Anyway, so like a great comedy director who did
right. Yeah.
Multiplicity, just a spectacular comedy director. So to me, it's no surprise that it works so well because that was not his first film. And you look
Right.
at that, and that's where, when I was pointing this out before, it's like Greenberg doesn't really have experience doing this. So it's interesting that he gets a
Yeah.
full 8 episode series
Mm.
on Netflix as his debut, really.
Yeah. And if you look at this simply as a debut, I think this is a tremendous accomplishment for him.
Yeah.
Like it is
Yeah.
it's very well done for a first
Yeah, let me
for
just
a first
double
project.
check. Let me just double check on that. But I really do believe that that's all that he's done. Um, career. He was working on as producer with The Daily Show. Yeah, he was an executive producer on Comedy Central's Endangered List. I don't even know what that is. But yeah, The Daily Show, Endangered List, and then Living with Yourself. I mean, that's really it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, yeah, okay. So overall though, I would much rather rewatch Multiplicity three times than rewatch Living
agreed.
with Yourself once.
Agreed. 100%. And so if anybody has not seen Multiplicity, then that is like our ringing endorsement for it.
Yes.
And I would say, even if you have not seen Living with Yourself, but you've somehow watched this entire podcast, or you skipped to the end, I don't know why anybody would do that. But if that's the case, and you've not seen either one, then go see Multiplicity.
Yes.
Rather than Living with Yourself. And in part because it's weird because it's not taking itself as seriously, but Michael Keaton gives so much more range in
Right.
Multiplicity than Paul Rudd gets a chance to do in Living with Yourself. It's not that he can't necessarily. It's just
Yeah.
that he's playing a really sad, frumpy, melancholic guy, and then an exuberant, over the top guy who then becomes sad, frumpy, and melancholic. Those are
Yeah.
basically the two different modes that he gets. But like in Multiplicity, you get four different versions of Michael Keaton, and each one is funnier than the last. It really does. Each one becomes funnier and funnier.
And they play off of each other so well.
Yes, they
It's
really
so
do. The dynamics
incredible.
between them, it is so great. If Multiplicity could become an entire TV series, I would watch that all day long. Just give me more Michael Keaton.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Oh man.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, are you planning on watching season 2 if they make one?
I'll watch the trailer. I'll commit to that. Okay. I'll give them a
Okay.
good 90 seconds to 2 minutes of my life, and I'll kind of get a sense of what's happening with the storylines. If it seems like they're exploring some of the stuff that I'm really interested in, then absolutely I'll watch it. If not, then maybe I'll watch it depending on what my queue looks like at the time and how busy I am. Because if I'm
Right.
really busy, like I'm not going to go out of my way to continue watching if it seems like it's just going to be more of what the second half of season one ended up being.
Mhm.
But if it seems like, if it's like, we've got to kill Tom Brady, then I'm like, I'm watching. you know like, we got
Right.
to kill the sixth iteration of Tom Brady, this clone. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that, like, Barack Obama is a clone as well. You're like, what? Like, if they go all the way to the top, right? Like, that's what I thought it was doing, and I'm like, this is so clever. And then I'm like, no, it's not. I was clever for thinking it, but they're not gonna go there. Like,
Yeah. I will definitely watch season 2 if they have some kind of one of the other spas in this
yes,
corporation.
exactly, exactly.
If they have basically anything to do with that, I will be all on board with this. How about if this is my pitch. If the two guys at the Top Happy Spa reveal to Paul Rudd that his DNA, when they cloned it, was also shipped off to every other spa, I'd be all in for
Sure.
it.
Yeah. I feel like
um,
there's so many interesting comedic situations, and comedic and dramatic situations, that could come out of that premise. And I'm just like, you've got such a
yeah.
great premise that you just introduced, and then you just like stopped exploring it entirely.
hmm If the trailer only shows Paul Rudd, and Kate, whatever her name,
Yeah.
whatever the actress's name is, if it only shows those three trying to raise a baby, I'm out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I would say if that's what the
Oh, all the
trailer looks
comedy
like.
of Paul Rudd and Paul Rudd trying to
Yeah.
do up a diaper. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah. Two men, one wife, and a baby. Yeah. That whole thing, right? Because there's the three men and a baby, like,
Right.
movies. Yeah. Yeah, if it's that, nope. No, thank you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know, folks. Like, Mr. Greenberg, if you're looking for any screenwriters to help, story consultants, hey, we could help.
Yeah.
Like, we've given away
Thanks.
all of this for free, but I'm saving my best ideas of, Barack Obama is a clone and we've got to do something about it. If you want to know more, you're gonna have to pay me.
I mean, Barack Obama does have a Netflix deal, right?
He does. He does. Yes. Right? I'm just saying, in terms of everybody, like, the enthusiasm over him, everybody was like, who is this person? Where did he come from? And then just rises to prominence so quickly and becomes president. And it's just this guy with a, as he puts it, he's got a funny name, and, like, all of this stuff of just like, he doesn't come from a distinguished family, and then just immediately I'm the president. And it's like,
Right.
how did that happen? Who is this guy? How is he such a good speaker? And I think it's just like, he's a clone. That'd
Oh
be so
man,
fun.
It would be so much fun, especially if we're like, oh, that's like the fifth version of him, and that's why he takes so many pauses in his speech.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so this whole thing of, with Paul Rudd, where it's just like the FDA is just like, we don't care about you anymore. It goes so much, deeper than this. Like you're just a tiny little part of it. Yeah, I don't know. Seems like a
Yeah.
fun storyline. I wish
Oh
that it
yeah.
would do that. I feel like it would actually end like consistently have funny moments if it kept exploring this. Instead, it just painted itself into this corner of how are you going to get any comedy out of this?
Yeah. I honestly I just want there to be, the second spa that mass produces Paul Rudd and then they have to go up against a Paul Rudd army.
That could be fun. That could be very fun. Yeah, I do like that
No,
idea.
I love Kate. No, I love Kate.
Right. And there remains only one Kate.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. This could go in a very strange direction. All right. Well, folks, you can feel free to comment below. Yeah, you can comment about multiplicity, living with yourself, any of those things. Um,
Any
yeah,
Netflix series that got canceled after one season.
yeah, yeah. If you can think of one, that'd be great. Because I think, yeah, just like very briefly on that, I was thinking about this. I think it's because Netflix's business model was founded on the idea that people will start watching a show that was not that popular, but it ended up on Netflix, and then it becomes insanely popular,
Mm,
right? That was how they started. They took these shows from network television that were not doing so well, and then they just threw the first 2 or 3 seasons onto Netflix, and they were still on network television. And then people caught up on Netflix, and then those shows took off because there's multiple examples of that. I think like the really big one would be Breaking Bad. That Breaking Bad
mm.
was not that popular, and then it gets released on Netflix. People get caught up with like I think 2 or 3 seasons of it, and then it just like becomes this monster show in terms of viewership. And I think so. Netflix is a little bit more patient because of that, because they've seen success before where it's like it might take 2 or 3 seasons, but sometimes it really will skyrocket. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so like through buzz and word of mouth, and when it's all available like that, just immediately available to stream, I
Yeah.
think. But if people can come up with examples of a 1 season cancellation, that'd be interesting.
Speaking of available to stream, I
Yeah.
don't think that we've mentioned it yet, but this podcast is now being released on all major podcast apps, I believe, as at least
All major
Spotify.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah, Spotify, Anchor.fm, Apple Podcast. Go ahead and subscribe to those. You'll get audio only versions of previously released episodes from YouTube. Um, and make sure to subscribe to that. Write us a review. Give us 5 stars or 4 stars. Don't give us three, two, or one. If you want to give us those, just don't even bother.
If somebody has
Uh,
listened and watched this entire podcast and they're like, this is a 2 star at best. Like, I'm like, why did you keep watching?
Right. Yeah.
Why did you keep listening? You weirdo. Go do something else.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah,
4 or 5
apparently
stars.
yeah, apparently ratings and reviews really help to get this to reach more people, share this with your friends and all that. Um,
Just like on Amazon with my book, if you read it, give me a good rating and stars and all of that, because
yeah,
that does
absolutely.
everything with promoting a book. Yeah, same kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for mentioning that, though, because I legitimately, I don't think we have said that on the podcast at all, that
Yeah.
there is an audio only version, but it is going back with the original. So basically, it's going to be almost a year behind with most audio versions of it, although we are going to be doing episode by episode reviews of The Mandalorian, and those will get released on the audio only version basically immediately. So
Yeah.
those will be new podcasts as an audio download
Yep.
or
And
stream.
if you're a new subscriber to this channel, then obviously that'll help you to get caught up with all the previous episodes.
Yeah.
And yeah, honestly, the very first one that we did was absolutely hilarious.
One of our
Just
best.
re-listen to it. Yeah,
One of our
it
best.
really was. It was. Oh my goodness, so funny. We were talking about Harry Potter and got so sidetracked by so many things.
That's my
Oh.
vision for the podcast.
Yeah, go listen to it. Here are ramblings. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the bell, people. We're gonna keep going. We're still ignoring it. Don't worry. I don't know what that. I think that's the fire drill. All right. We're gonna go home. Yeah. All right. We're done.